Welcome back, guys. This is our first video for the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty launch. We're going to be going over first, this is our introduction. So we're going to talk about the different mechanics that are returning, as well as new mechanics. And then we're going to talk about the different archetypes that we will see in the format as well when it comes to limited. So I hope you guys want to check it out. And after this, we'll be posting every single color as well for a separate video. So let's go ahead and jump into some of these different mechanics that we're going to be seeing here in the next week during the launch of the set. So first one we're going to touch on is the return of Ninjutsu. This is something we have seen in the past, and it goes very nicely with the ninja archetype. So our first card here is Blade Blizzard Kitsune. This is a fox ninja, which is super sweet and flavorful, and it has ninjutsu 4. So return an unblocked attacker you control to hand, put this card onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking, and it has double strike. We will go over the ratings for this card when we touch on white, but we just want to talk about ninjutsu here and what it means. Also, Yanks is on the call, obviously. Sorry, totally forgot to introduce you. So, Yanks, what do you think of the ninjutsu mechanic?
It's interesting that they've brought this back. So this originated in Betrayers of Kamigawa and kind of stayed on the sidelines for a while, partly because it's really thematically tied to Kamigawa, but they brought it back recently in like your Modern Horizons type sets. And it's been pretty popular there. And now that we're back to Kamigawa, I'm not surprised to see Ninjutsu return.
Certainly. I didn't play a ton of limited back in the original Kamigawa, but I did play a fair amount of the Modern Horizons, and it was kind of a fun mechanic. It's super overpowered, and a lot of the ninjas, you know, we'll take a look at the ninjas when we go into the actual set review, but some of them do cool stuff, like whenever you do damage to an opponent, you draw a card, something like that, something super flavorful and oftentimes very valuable. For example, this one has double strike. So if you attack with, like, let's say a 2/2 and they're just like, yeah, no blocks, now you're hitting for 4 damage instead of 2. So it can kind of catch your opponent very unaware, and it's super awesome to see this coming back.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of the ninjas have that kind of saboteur effect that trigger some sort of ability on combat damage. Anybody that's a fan of Cube on Magic Online will know, like, Fallen Shinobi as a really good blue-black card in that set that has ninjutsu.
Yep. So this is coming back. This is not a new mechanic. In fact, we were looking over the lists and we only saw one thing that was kind of new. It's not a full mechanic, but it is a key word. For the most part, everything we're seeing is going to be returning. So if you guys have been a long-time players, this is not going to be anything new to you. So the next one we wanted to talk about is the Greater Tanuki. This silly, dorky-looking 6-drop, it has an ability called Channel. This says, actually, Yanks, you want to take this one away?
Yeah, so Channel is basically a keyword or an ability word that basically gives the ability to pay something, some mana cost, discard it, and you get an effect. So in this case, it's you discard it and you search for a library for a basic land, put it onto battlefield tapped, then shuffle. You know, Channel doesn't define the effect itself. They have all sorts of different effects. Basically tells you that this card has this type of ability on.
Yeah, so it's sort of like adding cycling to a card. Cycling is something very specific, but it just gives you kind of an alternate use for the actual card itself, because this 6-drop is very expensive, and if you draw it too early in the game, it can be really detrimental. So this is sort of like an escape clause that, like, lets you get some other ability if needed. And if you draw it late, great, you have a 6-drop. But the cycling gives you just a little extra flexibility.
Yeah, cycling is a good comparison for this because it does exactly what you're saying. It gives you the option to pitch it if you don't need the effect, if you have too many of them, or it's just a good card late in the game.
Yeah, certainly. Or if you have any graveyard synergies, which we'll talk about what we think the different color different color pairs are as far as what their theme is, and there is a sort of green graveyard theme. Shocker, I know, but getting to channel this away and possibly recur it somehow is going to be really sweet too. All right, let's go ahead and move on. This is Reconfigure. This is actually one of the new ones. So this is an equipment that is also a creature, and that is something that's really new to Kamigawa and super flavorful with what they're trying to do. If you guys have seen any of the advertisements that they've been doing, they've been showing you the planeswalkers, and they've got like little animal companions that are like on their shoulder or something like that. And that's what these equipments are. It's like a little raccoon that's a 1/1 that can also bolster and help your other creatures out, which is pretty cool. So this says reconfigure for 2, attach target to a target creature you control, or unattach it, which is also not something we were able to do typically with a normal equipment. You can only reconfigure as a sorcery, while attached, this isn't a creature. So
yeah, there's also
go ahead.
good. I say if anybody played during the original Theros block, this kind of reminds me a little bit of Bestow, which was kind of a combination aura creature. This is a little different. Obviously, just like equipments tend to stick around longer and stay on the battlefield after their creature they're attached to dies. Same goes for this as opposed to auras, but there are a few kind of interesting, kind of rules implications here, right? It's an equipment, but that's a creature spell on the stack.
When you bestowed a creature, it didn't stay around after the creature was killed, right? I thought bestow was either.
No, it did. If you killed the creature, it fell off onto its own creature.
Oh, I thought it was like a flex creature. I completely forgot how bestow worked. It's been a while since we've played that set.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the big difference here, right, is that you can move this around, which you could not do with bestow. Bestow also had some other weird factors, like it was not a creature on the stack if you cast it as an aura, but this is always a creature on the stack.
So this is going to do something kind of cool, right? It's going to punish you less for having a lot of equipments, because oftentimes they're very punishing if you don't have a creature on board, or the more equipments you run, the lower your creature count tends to be. So it's sort of a nombo-y, when you get these crazy artifact-themed decks. But this takes away that, because this is still a creature and can attack. And again, it is also sort of wrath or removal protection. You can kind of build up this one big creature. If it gets killed, you're not losing all your value. You still have these little dudes out that you can use. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. This is a very interesting mechanic. I'm curious to see how all the cards with this are priced and how it plays out.
Definitely. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at another near and dear to my heart returning card type, and that is Sagas. So here we have the era of Enlightenment. However, Sagas are a little bit different. We've been seeing a lot of flip/modal cards in the past few sets. We had Transform, we had modal lands, we had modal spells, we had all sorts of things. But now we are getting Sagas that actually flip. And on the 3rd chapter, they turn into something else, typically a creature in this set. So you guys can see, again, we'll rate these cards later. But it's going to let you scry, it's going to gain you 2 life, and then you exile it, and it turns into a 2/2 first striker for just the 2 mana on the front side. So if you need the creature that turn, it's kind of slow, but it's actually a ton of value for only 2 mana.
Yeah, a couple interesting things on Saga with this set. I believe I'm scrolling through them quickly, but I believe they all become creatures on step 3. Obviously something we've never seen before. We also have, as you can see on this card, common Sagas for the first time.
Yep. So there's a ton of Sagas, and another thing to note is there's actually a pretty heavy enchantment theme in the format, which again, we'll talk about some of those themes at the end of this video. But these Sagas being at common level, being a pretty good rate for what you're getting, I think they're all going to be pretty playable and limited.
Yeah, this will be the first time we've seen this quantity of Sagas, so it'll be very interesting to see how that affects the format.
All right, so now we're going to talk about that keyword that's kind of new that we've never really gotten to see in the past, and that's modified. So this is not an ability on its own, but there are a lot of things that will imply having creatures that are modified, and that's what this one is. Lethal Exploit, this 2 mana instant, says target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. It gets an additional -1/-1 until end of turn for each modified creature you control as you cast this spell. So pretty interesting. There's a couple of things cool about this card, which I'm sure we'll talk more in depth during the set review. But it says as you cast. So if they then remove creatures, it shouldn't ruin the spell's ability, which we don't really see a lot of. And then also the modified creatures, which is enchantments, auras, counters, any modifications at all to the creature that isn't just the base cardboard that it comes with is a modifier, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it's specifically a couple things that I like on the rules in this. Auras, for example, only auras you control, so you putting like a pacifism type effect on your opponent's creature does not give them a modified creature. It's only your auras. Any type of counters, whether that be +1/+1, -1/-1,
Flying.
sharp. flying, trample, charge counters if they came back, loyalty counters if you had a creature that was, anything like that counts for this. And of course, equipment like the ones we just saw for Reconfigure.
Yeah, this has a lot of implications with other sets. Again, that's more of a constructed thing, but modified abilities is really, really cool because that's going to play well with enchantment decks. It's going to play well with equipment aggro decks. It'll play well with tokens and counters. So I love to see that this is something new, and I'm interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah, one thing I find interesting with the way they specified what works, and this is not really a limited thing because it's past sets, but like mutate would not count as a modified creature.
That's weird.
And mutate feels like the definition of modifying a creature.
I 100% agree. It never dawned on me that would not count. I would have just in the dark said yes. But yeah, no, that you would think that would be a thing. Maybe the idea is that when you mutate, there's no outside source.
Yeah, to be fair, mutate does a lot of weird rules things.
True.
So that it may have just been easier to not do it.
All right, moving on, guys. We're seeing a pretty strong return to vehicles. This is something we actually have been seeing more and more of in the last couple of sets, so much so that we actually considered not putting it onto the list here for our new and returning mechanics, but it is a lot stronger. We've only seen like one or so of each set, and there actually is sort of a vehicle sub-theme here in Kamigawa, so I wanted to go ahead and put that on. This is just a base, typical vanilla-y type dirtily vehicle. This is a trample haster with crew 2. It's a really cheap crew, but it's a 7 drop as well, so it's pretty pricey. Not all of the crew vehicles are going to be bombs or anything, and this is also at common, so you guys are going to see a ton of vehicles, and again, it is a bit of a sub-theme.
I'm not sure we can call anything with haste dirtily.
I mean, it's a 7 drop.
It is.
I feel like my 2-mana white removal is just going to eat this.
Well, that's true. One interesting thing in this set with regards to vehicles is we see for the first time certain creatures with the ability to crew as if they had a greater power.
Yes.
Which is just not something we've seen before. A 2-power creature crewed for 2, but we have some in here where a 2-power creature would crew for 4 or things like that. So. Yep.
And that's that, first time we've really seen a particular archetype that shows a desire to have a lot of these vehicles on board. But again, it's sort of like the equipment thing where it's if you have too many vehicles and not enough creatures to crew them, you're going to get kind of stuck.
Yeah, it's interesting. Equipment and vehicles, I didn't think about this till right now, but both of them are kind of seeing the same thing, right? It's a older, different lengths of time, equipment versus vehicles, older card type, and they're just expanding on how they can use them.
Definitely. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about a couple of interesting things that we're adding and themes in Kamigawa. And the first one we wanted to talk about is the new shrine cycle. These play very well with old shrines. Most of you guys would know those from more constructed decks. So we're getting an addition to that, which is pretty neat. But the difference being is that this time, not only are they shrines, they're creatures, and they're an enchantment that enchantment creature that lets you trigger a bunch of stuff here in Kamigawa as well. So I have a good feeling that these are going to be playable even if you're not in a shrines deck, just because they kind of cover all of these bases. It, like I said, is a creature. It's got keywords on it. This one has vigilance. It does an ability, which is pretty sweet, and it's going to play very well with any other synergies that you might have with your enchantments.
Yeah, we saw the original cycle. You have Hondens. Everybody that kind of likes shrines really like shrines, so they're going to be excited to see these.
That is certainly the case. All right, we talked a little bit when we went over the first card with the Ninjutsu, but we do want to touch on the overarching color combination of Dimir being that ninja archetype. So you're going to see most of your ninjutsu cards in these black blue colors. Now, we did see 1 or 2 ninjas in every single color, but that's pretty common, similar to Crimson Vow, where we had 1 vampire basically in every single color, but not enough to support.
Yeah, blue-black ninjutsu is going to be a deck, and wouldn't surprise me if it's a pretty good one. Ninja, as much as there are all sorts of different mechanics like we're talking about, when you think Kamigawa, I think the first thing that a lot of people think of is ninjutsu, so it would not surprise me if this was a very strong theme.
Certainly, unless it's, like the werewolves in the werewolf set, but...
Well, yes, there is that.
But I agree. I also think that this is a mechanic that Wizards itself really likes, so I think that lends very well to it being a powerful mechanic. All right, so now we've got a little bit of a lifelink and enchantment theme here. This is a 2-drop for 2 that's got some sweet abilities. So the fact that this is a Selesnya Lord that leans towards having enchantments and having some life gain and things means that this is going to be, I think, a pretty strong archetype as well.
Yeah, one thing you may have noticed with some of the cards we've been showing, even while talking about other things, is that enchantment creatures are back. For the first time in Standard that wasn't a Theros set. There may be some Commander ones that I don't know about, but only in the original Theros block and then Theros Beyond Death did we see enchantment creatures, which you definitely helps to make enchantments viable and limited when you can make them creatures as well. Of course, on top of that, we have all the sagas, and Modified is going to lend to an enchantment theme as well, since auras count.
We actually saw quite a few cards that were, and in multiple colors too, not just a single color pair. But there were these hybrid signpost cards that say, if you control an artifact and an enchantment, do a thing. And there's also individual support for artifact and enchantment. And these are spread across a lot of colors, not just 1 or 2 color pairings. So I expect you guys will see a lot of enchantments, and it wouldn't surprise me if some main deck, even in best of 1, enchantment artifact removal would be reasonable to run in limited.
Definitely, that is one of the hallmarks of enchantment creature based sets, is that disenchant effects become main deckable.
Yes, absolutely. And also, like, sometimes we see the destroy target enchantment or flying creature also going to be very main deckable in this format.
Yep, for sure.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on. This is kind of centered around the samurai, and that is more the Boros colors. And again, we'll kind of go over those in just a second. Whenever a samurai or a warrior you control attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So this Boros samurai theme has a kind of stackable attacks alone abilities. So you get 4 samurais on board, 1 attacks alone, and it gets a buff from all of the other samurais, which is kind of neat. So if you get like +1/+1 and first strike and something else, then it's going to kind of stack really in a way that's going to make it difficult for your opponent to deal with. And if they all cost 2 or 3 mana, it's going to really kind of steamroll the game.
Yeah, whereas Ninjutsu obviously is the ninja mechanic, this unnamed attacks alone is the samurai mechanic in the set.
Definitely true. Okay, so that is the end of the cards that we kind of wanted to draw your guys' attention to. So now let's go ahead and talk about the different archetypes that we wanted to include for this new set that's launching, on Thursday, the 10th?
Yeah, yep, 6 days away from, when we're recording.
Right around the corner. So let's go ahead and talk about those color archetypes so that way you guys know what to be on the lookout for when you start your drafting. All right, so here is the little layout that we made for all of the 10 guilds that you guys are typically used to seeing here, especially in Limited, and we went over all of the different cards in them to just kind of break down what we thought that you would see most for in those archetypes. Now, again, there was actually a lot of overlap, which is really strange. There was a couple of missing signpost cards, and we also found some signpost cards that didn't have a ton of support. So I feel like the decks here are going to be very diverse and a little less synergistic for some of these archetypes. Yanks, would you agree with that?
Definitely. There were some of your typical gold uncommon signposts that you look at them and go, I know exactly what that color pair wants to do. And you saw a few other ones, you go, maybe this, maybe that. Some colors had 3 or 4 cards, some had 1. It was an interesting mix.
Yeah, there was actually 1 or 2 signpost cards where I was like, I know exactly what that wants to do, but then looking at the colors, saw no support for it. I found that very strange. Or maybe not no, but very limited.
Yeah, and there's definitely a big group, like if we're looking at this, between like Izzet and Orzhov and Rakdos and Azorius, that all kind of this like mix of artifact-y stuff. Even the Rakdos sacrifice had a lot of sacrifice and artifact type thing.
One of the things I will say is as we were looking at through the cards from top to bottom, they're ordered based on how easily we could tell what they were. So we like kind of had to research and like look into it. So we were like, Boros, easy, ton of samurai support. And we already kind of talked about what that was. And then we had Selesnya. We saw a ton of enchantment. You know, when an enchantment comes into play, your enchantments cost one less. And we saw those in those two color pairs, in white and green specifically. Gruul had a lot of modified options.
Yeah.
You want to talk about Simic?
Simic, the one Simic Signpost card had multiple different channel abilities on it, one for green, one for blue, which is an interesting theme because channel tends to be a very individual card mechanic, right? You don't tend to have cards that synergize with each other because if you're channeling, you're discarding. So they're not going to stay in play and interact. But so that's interesting. Is it had an artifact, make things cheaper, artifact lord. Dimir is probably the one exception to what we said about going down in order. We just kind of were like, oh yeah, Dimir's ninjas, obviously.
Yes.
When we got to it.
Orzhov was one of the ones that I saw a pretty neat Lord signpost card, and then I was looking at the rest of the set, and I was like, well, I guess like this is kind of here, but it's going to be kind of a stretch, so I feel like that would be probably a pretty underdrafted archetype, and or just like a very... you know, ABC Magic draft good cards have a thing. It's not super synergistic, but there was an artifact / enchantment hybrid where it was like, if you have one of each of these things in play, you can do a thing. So it was definitely there, but it was a bit more of a sub theme than we would think of for maybe ninjas or samurais. Moving on, we have... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was saying the Orzhov one I think is going to be one of the more interesting ones to draft because some of the cards want you to have both an artifact or an enchantment to get any benefit. Some will give you one benefit for one and a second benefit for the other. So trying to remember and balance the ones you have are going to be really interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to draft too because there is so much overlap. Like the Rakdos has a ton of artifact synergies, and then you have Selesnya and another archetype that has a ton of enchantment synergies. So there's so much overlap with that. I feel like it might be a tough spot to try to get, and you would very often be unbalanced, like you were saying. Maybe there's two Selesnya players or something that are taking the enchantments, and you end up with a bunch of artifacts, kind of killing this archetype.
Yeah, it feels like looking at this list, like ninjas and samurai are good places to be because they don't overlap much with other things. Now, granted, I think ninjas might be overdrafted first just because it's ninjas and everybody loves the ninjas. But
I would agree, but I'm worried that Boros has just been so piley in the last few sets that like I worry that samurais are going to be bad, but I hope not. All right, moving on, guys. Rakdos Sacrifice. Again, there was a lot of overlap here with artifacts specifically, but we did see a fair amount of sacrifice in Rakdos. Spoiler alert.
Everybody raise your hand if you're surprised that Rakdos is Sacrifice. No one?
No.
Okay, good.
Okay, moving on. This was one of the ones I liked the most. This Azorius vehicle theme. Blue and white had a few vehicles. The Azorius Lord, which we'll again see all of these cards during our set review, was a really interesting and seemed like a really good Lord, but I didn't see a ton of support for it. So I'm wondering if it's just like, if you happen to be an Azorius, you have this kind of cool bonus to your vehicles, but I don't know if it's going to be strong enough to be a full major theme.
Yeah, especially on the blue side, there didn't seem to be a ton of support for it. There's a little bit on white, but yeah, it did not seem as supportive as some of the other ones.
I did see like 3 vehicles in the blue, so I'm wondering if like the blue has the vehicles and then white has like some support, because they were common and uncommon, so it's fine. Golgari had some generic graveyard stuff. I didn't see anything that was super thrilling, but again, I didn't look super closely. We will take a deeper cut at that when we get into our set review. Thoughts on Graveyard?
Yeah, I mean, the uncommon looked powerful, but I didn't see a ton of synergy. That was one of the color pairs that only had one card in the multicolored section, so it's tough to quite get a handle on what the support is for it. Yeah,
I actually wanted to dive a little bit into that next. Is that just wanted to note, guys, that part of the way you should be drafting this, once we get a feel for the set, we'll have more news, and Yanks and I, of course, will do our we were wrong segment where we kind of reevaluate the archetypes themselves as well as cards that we misjudged or misevaluated. But the color distribution between multicolor cards here in this set, I think, was the steepest I've ever seen. Some of these cards for the, we saw a multicolor card for every single one, but some had 1 and some had like 4, right?
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through. I mean, there were 4 Boros multicolored cards, for example.
And they were all good.
And only one Izzet one.
Yeah.
Just to use it, and only one Rakdos one.
I think Izzet might have been only 1 or 2 as well. Orzhov, I mean.
Orzhov had a couple. Golgari only has 1. There are a few like 3 and 3 color, and there's a 5 color card, so that changes things a little bit.
Yeah, I don't really count that 5 color monstrosity. Also, the Sagas, I think, were on a different tab, and there was like 2 multicolors, like a Rakdos and something else. So
there's a Rakdos and the 5 color.
So a little bit more support there, but again, it's interesting to see the inclusion of all 5 guilds, but not equal support for them. Now, usually when we see, for example, like in Crimson Vow, we didn't draft a lot of Boros because there were equal Boros rares, but we knew they were bad. So even if you did happen to open them or get past them, they weren't going to be worth playing oftentimes. This is the complete opposite, where you might just want to stay out of some color pairings, just knowing that the support is not going to be as come around as often as it might be for another color pair.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still just scrolling through some of these, and yeah, the imbalance is pretty astounding.
Yeah, I'm really surprised to see it, to be honest. But, I mean, who knows? It could just be also for like some 3-color support. We'll get more into that towards the end.
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of reasons why that could be, and we'll know better when we get a better look at the entire.
Are you good, Yanks?
Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching our introduction to Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. If you guys are watching this, make sure you guys come back. We will be doing every single color with their own video and rating these cards for limited gameplay on a scale of 1 to 5 and tell you guys whether or not they will be useful. And if videos are not your thing, you guys can also check out handwritten articles. They'll come out a few days after the videos, but they will be on coolstuffinc.com. So I'll be putting all of those into it. And then we usually wait about 2 to 3 weeks after the set is launched, and we will be doing again, kind of renew video talking about where we were wrong, what's worse or better than we thought, and give you guys a breakdown of which archetypes we think are the strongest. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. I'd like to give a special thank you to those of you who have signed up for our Patreon. I couldn't make this content without you. Also to Cool Stuff Inc. and KMC Sleeves for supporting the channel as well. Definitely check them out and use our discount codes to support the channel.